Today we're looking at combining words, phrases and clauses. Your learning goal is I can identify and use various types of clauses and phrases. Firstly, we'll be looking at main and subordinate clauses. For example, in the sentence, I was grumpy because I missed dinner. I was grumpy is the main clause because it makes sense on its own, and because I missed dinner was a subordinate clause because it does not make sense on its own. So a main clause makes sense on its own and a subordinate clause does not make sense on its own. Both a main clause and a subordinate clause needs a subject and a verb. But a main clause will make sense on its own and a subordinate clause will not. It doesn't matter if the main clause is first, before the subordinate clause, or after the subordinate clause. So long as it makes sense on its own, then it's a main clause. So now we're going to put this into practice. Tick one box in each row to show if the underlying clause is a main clause or a subordinate clause. I walked to school with Hazel as we live on the same road. So pause the video now and state whether the underlined part of the sentence is a main clause or a subordinate clause. Just write down main or subordinate on a piece of paper. So that's right. I walked to school with Hazel as we live on the same road. As we live on the same road is a subordinate clause as it doesn't make sense on its own and it has a subject and a verb. Hazel uses a wheelchair, so we went up the ramp. So again, pause the video now and write the word main or subordinate for which clause you think it is. So that's right. Hazel uses a wheelchair is a main clause. It makes sense on its own, it has a subject and a verb. So it's a main clause. The next one, before we entered the classroom, we greeted our friends. Do you think before we entered the classroom is a main clause or a subordinate clause? Pause the video now and write down your answer. So that's right. Before we entered the classroom is a subordinate clause. It doesn't make sense on its own, it has a subject and a verb, and therefore it's a subordinate clause. So well done. Now we're going to be looking at relative clauses. A relative clause is a type of subordinate clause that adds information about a noun or clause. It usually starts with relative pronouns like who, which, that, whose or whom, so you know what the additional information is referring to. For example, in the sentence Janie, who hated spending money, was about to go shopping, we can see that who hated spending money is the relative clause. Use the information in the box to complete the sentence below with a relative clause. Remember to punctuate your answer correctly. My uncle, is going to plant potatoes. Pause the video now and write on a piece of paper a relative clause that would make sense in the gap. Remember, they usually start with who, which, that, whose or whom. So that's right, you might have written who lives on a farm, but it didn't have to be this. There are a few different answers. For example, who's a farmer would also have worked, and you would need to make sure that it was written WHO''S. So any grammatically correct relative clause that retains the meaning of the sentence in the box would have worked. The next question says to underline the relative clause in the sentence below. After her dance class, Jamila has a strawberry milkshake, which she buys from the local cafe. So I'd like you to pause the video now and write down which part you think the relative clause is. So welcome back. That's right, the relative clause is which she buys from the local cafe. That starts with a relative pronoun and it adds information. So well done. So welcome back. Now we're going to be looking at noun phrases. Noun phrases are phrases that consist of a modifier and a noun. The modifier can be a variety of word types like determiner, for example, the girl. It can also include adjectives, for example, in the noun phrase, the big red ball. So a noun phrase is a phrase with a modifier and a noun. Now we're going to try a SATs question. Write a noun phrase containing at least 3 words to complete the sentence below. Remember to punctuate your answer correctly. Opened the door. So remember you need to use 3 words and write a noun phrase, which consists of a modifier and a noun. So pause the video now and have a go. So welcome back to the video. There are a variety of answers for this, so long as you've included a modifier and a noun and you've used 3 words. And you need to have made a capital letter at the start of your sentence. My example is the bus driver opened the door. You might have said anything. You might have said Mary very quickly opened the door. So long as you've put a capital letter at the front, and if you've used a name later on, we always need to capitalise proper nouns. So well done.